You think about fields with no one to see them, all that quiet life continuing on with no purpose beyond self-propagation, tassels rotting in October. It gets to you if you let it. But instead of just driving the whole way from border to border, let's say you get out into the rows, where the growth is thick and tall enough to dampen sound. You notice this effect even before you begin to speak. Your ears register how the air is a little different. Hello, people yell, making sure it's not just some vague feeling they have, or is this heaven? They don't mean that. They're quoting from a movie about a man who builds a baseball field to coax the ghosts of old baseball players into emerging from the corn. There are other times when people go into the fields and yell different things. Help, for example, often repeatedly, with increasing volume, or where are you taking me? But nobody usually hears them. A few rows of corn will muffle the human voice so effectively that even a few insignificant rows away, all is silence, what to speak of out of the highway's shoulder. All the way back there, already fading into memory now. To make yourself heard, you'd need something substantial. The roar of the combine harvester in autumn, mowing all this to the ground and then rolling back over the stubble like a ruthless conqueror from an alien planet. Or something greater, bigger, louder. An airplane? But nobody's going to land any airplanes out here.
I was going to land an airplane out there. I guess I'm not going to now.
No, you're not allowed.
I didn't know you got your pilot's license, Jacob.
I didn't. I didn't know. Wait, I had to do that too? Everybody's getting in the way of me landing an airplane in the middle of fucking Iowa.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf. Jacob here with Lenore.
Hello.
How you doing, Lenore?
I am chugging along. You may notice something a little bit different. I'm hotspotting my phone for various, technical difficulty reasons. That's where my connection comes from. So we soldier on.
Recovering from COVID-19.
Yeah, holy fuck. Like, my second time around is... I was able to take out the trash and not keel over, so that's an improvement. But, still not fun.
Well, the good news is the FDA just reapproved the COVID vaccine, and they've restricted it massively. So good luck getting that booster. Nice. Don't worry, RFK Jr. is making us healthy again. But it's in good news, we do have a guest on today. It's been a long time coming. We have Josiah Sutton from Fruitless. Welcome to the pod, Josiah.
Hello, it's good to be here.
I've gone on your show, Fruitless, before. At the very top, I just want to say, Fruitless is absolutely, if you dig this show, I really think y'all will be into Fruitless. Talking about, culture and religion, media, politics, a lot of really fun stuff. We were joking before this that it is kind of like what Josiah is, into. He's just going to talk about. And that could, if someone had, less interesting interests, that could maybe fall off. But I find Josiah's interest to be very in line with at least us on the show's interest. I've been on to talk about Snowpiercer, the Bong Joon-ho film from about a decade ago. We had a great time with that. And really excited to have you on today to talk about Universal Harvester. Anything else you want to say about yourself before we get into this one? And also let us know what made Universal Harvester come to mind when we were talking about books.
Absolutely. Well, one of the themes I come back to on Fruitless a lot, although I haven't done it in a while, is thinking through the Midwest.
Yeah.
About, the Midwest as a region, culturally, whatever. I really like Phil Chrisman. I've had on the show a number of times. He's done a really, wrote really good essays about that. And so it's something I think about a lot, and I try to come back to on the show periodically, because it's something I feel that I uniquely can comment on more than, some of the other political topics or religious topics where you can find a number of people can speak on that. So that also plays a role in me choosing Universal Harvester, because this is the most Iowan book ever. I actually read it for the first time, a few years back. I've been a big fan of John Darnielle and the Mountain Goats for a long time. But when I first read it is because I was kind of on a obsession with wanting to write some sort of novel that was a bit of like Midwestern regionalism or whatever. I was really interested in the idea of like, what if you did Southern Gothic style to like the Midwest? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? What would be different about that? What would be the same? And a friend of mine was like, "Have you read Darnielle's like fiction? Because you're kind of describing Universal Harvester." So my good friend Francis talked me into it. So I read it before I wrote the rough draft of that novel that I still need to do something with. It's just been sitting on my computer for years now. But I read it before then, and so John Darnielle has been just a really big influence on me artistically and whatever. So.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Midwestern Gothic novel from Josiah coming soon.
Coming
Uh,
soon.
sorry, not the
never get around to editing it. Yeah,
it's a hell of a concept though, and I gotta say, like, before I read this book, but not by a lot, just a little before I read this book, I literally was at Flannery O'Connor's house.
I'm so
This
glad
was
you
this
brought. Yeah, okay.
this was this past weekend,
Yeah.
and like the we're gonna do Flannery at some point.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
waiting on a specific guest for Flannery O'Connor. I won't spoil that just yet. Somebody
Okay.
I'm working on getting. But the vibes just being out there were like it's interesting how it's distinct from Universal Harvester, but how there's so much of the similarities. A field doesn't look like a field is supposed to look like. It is its own thing that you experience close up. This old equipment that's out there, this feeling of passing time, the feeling that a barn or a farmhouse is somehow a fixture of a land, but also when you get up to it, it's so flimsy and has to be constantly maintained. I'm
Yeah.
reminded of a summer I spent basically, I mean, we say fixing my grandfather's barn. I basically rebuilt my grandfather's barn. That's
Right.
what
Yeah.
fixing a barn is, right?
Mhm.
Like a barn that's old. Things like that, you think of it and it's a very interesting thing. I'm really excited to talk about this author too, because he has been meaningful to me. He really was in high school, as probably the Mountain Goats were to many people. Before we get into it, Lenore, do you have any history with John's writings or music or anything like that?
Not with neither. Well, to the extent that I have any influence, God, I have no influence with him. But to the extent that I have any experience with John Darnielle's writings, it's through following him on socials, of course. We like his politics. He's a very
We
principled.
got some choice quotes from those coming up too.
Yeah. He strikes me as very principled on that front. Particularly, like he's a liberation theology guy, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's a big part of him for me too. Is the post evangelical side of him?
Yes,
is something that
definitely.
resonates with me. Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something
Definitely. Well,
definitely worth unpacking.
yeah, let's talk about him. Let's get into it. John Darnielle. Let me just pull up this bio. So primarily, he's known, even though they don't put it in the bio of this book, as the primary, sometimes soul, definitely lyricist, music guy, vocalist of the Mountain Goats, the band. He does it all. He's definitely had people tour with him that are useful and helpful on certain albums, on Tallahassee and whatnot. But he's the Mountain Goats guy, no
That's
doubt.
fascinating that that's not in his bio in the novel.
I don't know to what extent it's that he wants it to be able to stand alone. Because I will say, like, people have like a really negative reaction to this book, and I'll be interested. To talk
Yes,
about
they
that
do.
later. A lot of intense negative reactions to this book. But one of the, I think one of the things that I see people saying a lot is that this one doesn't feel like Mountain Goats, as opposed to Wolf and White Van. You could see the Mountain Goats stuff going on. But
I
this
don't know.
one-
I disagree, or I don't know that I agree. It doesn't feel like the Mountain Goats, but it's also funny that people feel like it needs to feel like the Mountain Goats.
Yeah, it's
you know
his
what I mean?
novel. It's not
Right. But he was born in 1967 in Indiana, but grew up in San Luis Obispo, California, the son of a librarian and English professor. Mother divorced very young. They moved to LA, where his mother married a abusive pharmacist. And we're going to have to take a collective L on this one, because this abusive pharmacist was a member of the Communist Party and an avowed Marxist, but also beat his wife and child. So, having good politics does not make you a good person.
Mhm.
And, Darnielle was very influenced by this guy preaching equality, talking about all this stuff, talking about women's rights, and then how he treated his wife and son and the way he saw the world and the way he kind of laundered all that through like the concept of I'm a revolutionary, so I can do what I want. Like in my personal life, I'm absolved. Very similar to how like religious people, right, will absolve their sin, because I did my church thing. So I found that very interesting, and I also found it interesting because he cites this stepfather figure as both what drove him to drugs and near suicide, and also what brought him to like left politics. And he said he at least appreciates him for that because his politics were right. He just was a bad guy. Which that takes some principle to be like, okay, I'm going to separate like the man from his ideology.
Yeah.
So his mom got him a typewriter when he was 7 years old. And he says the first sentence he ever wrote on it is burned into his mind. He was writing a story, and it was, once a bugle stood in the window of a store that sold brass goods. So he claims that's his first sentence that he ever wrote on the typewriter. Age 7, that's a pretty solid sentence right there.
It reminds me a little bit of, there's a bit very early in the book, like right at the end of chapter 1, where it goes like, oh, Jeremy keeps his job and then something else happens, right? It sounds anodyne as shit, but there's so much packed into it as it happens.
I find this interesting. His stepfather made a critique of him constantly when he was young that became important to him later on. And the critique was that all art that didn't serve the revolution was useless. His father would tell him that when he would write anything that wasn't revolutionary. Again, telling like a 12-year-old this at the time. Which is like objectively, like if you were watching it on a TV show, that would be a very funny thing to tell a child. Like, you can imagine a good actor selling that. In like, communist Seinfeld, but like in real life, that's a horrible thing to tell a child.
Go to your room. You don't get your typewriter back until you can prove to me you've read On Protracted War.
Yeah, just getting handed like a crayon picture of like, this is you, father. And it's like, I don't know. I'm not seeing anything about the state and revolution in this. So
It got so bad that when his English teacher submitted a poem he wrote to a contest for the New Yorker, he won and was going to get flight out to New York. Not only did his stepfather refuse to let him go, but he said anything written not in meter verse wasn't poetry and kicked him out of the house for a few days.
That's horrible.
I mean, it's horrible, but you're like, I'm just like trying to imagine this wretched man who's just like so stuffy and annoying. Like, unfortunately, like when people describe like an annoying communist online, it turns out we found the guy that they're describing.
Yeah,
it's this guy.
No, what a hill to die on is your child's creative pursuits.
So he still sees his stepfather as a literary and music influence, and his mother as well. Also, his stepfather, the only thing they were able to really bond on was professional wrestling, which they liked together, which he credits as kind of a lot of his love of theater comes out of that, a lot of love of showiness, which is like an interesting thing because like the Mountain Goats and professional wrestling feel worlds apart. But there's that interesting, like that presentation and stuff like that.
Yeah, well,
and also like dealing with masculinity too.
Yeah, the masculinity and aggression mixed with the theatrics is like so big in his thing. And what if you listen to, I think it's Beat the Champ is the one that's explicitly an album that's all wrestling shit. It's so good.
And there's a great presentation I saw not too long ago on the Dropout show Smarty Pants that argues that wrestling is just drag, and I think that's pretty much true.
100% true.
And that's why it's good, by the way.
Yeah. It's woke, parentheses, good.
Yeah, good. Things got so bad though for him, for John, that he was suicidal, using heroin and crystal meth by the end of high school and afterwards. He ended up pulling himself together through a couple things. One of them was through faith, not something his stepfather instilled in him, really something he kind of came to, and also through a therapist who encouraged him to take that pain and help other people with it, which is like kind of an interesting way of putting it, but it clearly worked for John. He trained to be a nurse tech. He would not become a nurse tech, but that's where he started writing and piano work. And then one day he comes up with the name for a band, the Mountain Goats, from listening to a Screamin' Jay Hawkins song, Yellow Coat. He likes the sound of it. He starts playing local shows, passing out cassettes to friends, and he just one of those cassettes ends up in the hands of a guy who owns Shrimper Records, and he gets signed, which is like the late 80s ruled. What the fuck?
That's also what's cool about the sound of that early stuff too, is you can totally tell it is just like you got some guys like low budget tape and just like, well, we'll just copy this and send it out, because they've had that like nasty lo-fi hum and stuff like that going on. It's so good.
He even says his like music couldn't have existed in like an older age, like because people were like, oh, you could just do the acoustic, and he's like, there's tech is like, he feels tech is like embedded in his music even when it's not super obvious, and I think that's part of the reason why. 1994, he meets his wife Lalatree on an internet message board and moves to Iowa for her. It's how he ends up in Iowa.
What do we know about that? Like the content of the message board? What are people moving across the country over?
She was into rock. He was like very small in the rock scene, but she like commented on his like message. I don't know what message board it was, but commented on some page he was on that she had liked some other set, and she had liked his set at something. They start emailing back and forth. They start talking about rock and indie and all music and all kinds of stuff like that. They're just into the same shit. And they end up like hitting it off like crazy.
Wow. Well, this one goes out to all our reply guys. You know, your dreams can come true.
They can come true.
He toured for years, was small, had a devoted fan base, obsessive fan base, but made like very little money. And he gets at around this time a double degree in classes in English from Pitzer College and works in a psych ward. He finally breaks through in 2001 to actually making any money onto national radio with the album Tallahassee that actually kind of gets him play. It's a great, if you ever want to listen to Mountain Goats, I think Tallahassee is a really solid intro album, to be honest.
That one,
I'm not calling it its best album, but it's a really solid, to me, like album, like, okay, here's kind of what this guy's deal is, at least as a gateway. And then like touring, intense relationship with fans really wore him out. A big part of like, I think big part of this book too, and big part of why he felt comfortable in the Midwest and now in North Carolina, was because he needs like space. He is a very like not lonely, like a guy who needs his space. He says his personality is to, quote, never talk to people if I can help it, but I feel a dedication to the people who listen to what I do, end quote. That got like really, really intense, especially in the early 2000s, to the point of driving him basically to a breakdown, with the feeling like everyone who commented on his message board asking him for something, he needed to respond to them. People were sending him the stuff about their mental health crises. People were asking him advice. And it was like the bigger he got and the more he tried to respond to that stuff, the worse it got. And it like, he got to the point where he felt like he couldn't tour anymore. And he was like, he had like like he thought he had a heart attack. He had a breakdown so bad. So he had to like change his relationship to his fans and stuff now. He's still like a very gracious guy who will engage online, but he was like, wait, I don't owe every single person who comments like an essay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In 2008, he wrote a novella, Black Sabbath, Master of Reality, his first foray into literature that I know of, as part of a 33.5 or 33.5 series about albums. And it featured someone obsessively pursuing a tape/Walkman with the album Black Sabbath, Master of Reality. And he was just like chasing it around a psych ward. Have either of y'all read this one?
No, I hadn't even heard of it.
It sounds fun. I hadn't even... Wolf in the White Van gets him on the literary scene, noted. 2014, nominated for a National Book Award within 3 days of it coming out. It's about like a disfigured game designer. He's deep in classic nerd culture, role playing. He's doing a role playing game via mail. I've not read this one. Josiah, have you?
It's so good. Yeah. And actually, so me coming on here to talk about this feels like it's opening up the John Darnielle door for Fruitless, because I haven't opened it yet. So now that I've just broken this, we're doing Sunset Tree on the Music Exchange, and we're going to talk about Wolf and White Van in October. So
fuck yeah.
If you want more Darnielle, come over to Fruitless.
Fuck yeah. No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And then we will come back to Universal Harvester, but that comes out in 2017. It gets the Edgar Award nominee and gets less Universal praise than Wolf and the White Van. Very well reviewed, like by like literary people, but like from sort of the fan base, there is like this reaction of like, what is this? This is boring. This isn't scary. This is whatever. This doesn't sound like you. People that don't know anything.
It sounds A little bit like it sounds a little bit like the criticism that 28 years later has been receiving from some circles because, and of course
Mm,
it's partly a victim of its own marketing. You know, you watch that incredible trailer for 28 years later, it looks incredibly visceral, and it is visceral and gnarly, to be clear. But there's also such a meditative, like, coming of age aspect about it that doesn't necessarily come across. And there is certainly a lot of the meditative about this novel.
yeah. Yeah. That is such a theme with this fiction I've noticed is that I think they are kind of horror novels, but it's probably bad they're getting called horror novels because you have a
Hmm.
horror fan kind of vibe of people coming into it and then being like, this book doesn't really scare you. It kind of gets under your skin maybe, but it doesn't, like, I don't know, horrify you in a way that I think a horror audience is wanting.
Yeah, if you think about it, like, I think it's maybe more horrifying that a woman stews in like pain this way for decades and decades and decades and expresses it in ways that freaks people the fuck out. But it's true,
Yeah.
there is no like grand knifing or machine gun
Yeah.
spree or something like that, which I did expect going into this.
It certainly has that cadence, right? You know, I mean, go back to the beginning of the episode. You know, it's chilling. It's, you know, it's, and we'll get into it, but there is a certain voyeuristic quality that the narrative takes on at a certain specific point
Mhm.
that I quite love. But it definitely doesn't build up to a grand knifing. You're right.
2022, Devil House comes out. It's gothic horror, a true crime writer investigating a double homicide. Haven't read this one either.
I started it and never finished it, and I need to finish it because I loved it, but I got just busy at the time.
Yep.
Okay, there have been like 3 separate occasions where I've like picked it up in a bookstore and not ended up walking out with it. So that's one I will get around to. Like
Mhm.
it sounds like I've started with the one that, like, because I did enjoy the book, but it sounds like I've started the one that I would enjoy the least of the three.
Yeah.
But like those other two, like, are closer to my wheelhouse.
Absolutely. And I will say, like, yeah, literature fans will know picking up a book and not finishing it, not a maybe reason you didn't like it. That's just how reading
Yeah.
books goes.
Just happens.
He has a book coming out
Mhm.
very soon in December. Be reminded that the most important book you should be pre-ordering for December is They Called Her Rebel, coming out December 9th
Right.
by Jacob Dallas. But John Darnielle, if you've got time for a second book, he's got a book called This Year, 365 Annotated Songs, dropping in December, where he's going in depth writing about the lyricism behind his older music, which I'm actually really excited to read that now that I'm like back on this train. He also regularly writes for Decibel magazine and publishes poetry. Great music analysis. He's we talked about some of this other stuff, but some things I found kind of funny about him. Do you know he named 2 of his biggest music influences? He named a bunch of people that you might think about, and like stuff like that. And then he named Amy Grant and Rich Mullins as inspirations.
Yeah.
And while I see it, I'm like, holy shit, dude. I respect Rich Mullins, actually. I do have some respect for Rich Mullins. Amy Grant, maybe not as much.
less so Amy Grant, but yeah. No, we did an episode on Rich Mullins last year.
Yeah.
And I love that guy. As you know, much
Good
as I
old
probably
ragamuffin.
disagree with quite a lot of his theology or whatever, I think he's a real guy. He's a real one, you know.
I'll take like Rich Mullins over like Toby Mac any day.
This is where I'm outed as the least cool person on this podcast because I don't know these names.
Lenore, we're talking about Christian music. You're not the least cool for not knowing him.
Oh, how dare you! Haven't heard of Awesome God?
Yeah.
I've heard that our God is an awesome God.
That would be that. Yeah,
Really?
Yeah.
that's that guy.
Oh, wow.
Mhm. Yeah. This chick don't know anything about Hillsong. Okay. Let's see. His politics, we're getting towards the end here, but his politics are generally quite good. Certified good politics haver. Fundraised for abortion rights heavily, fought for feminist causes, was out there in 2007, like saying like we should normalize calling ourselves feminists, which is like, not an easy time to say that, nor is it now, obviously. I just to quote him a couple times, he says, "My politics in American terms are far left. It seems clear to anybody that the problems we are facing societally cannot be solved by the free market." And then some good quotes from him just from his Blue Sky account over the last 2 weeks. 5 days ago, he said, "Yeah, I'll incorporate AI into my workflow, the workflow of my butt." Got it.
There we go.
Pretty good.
Get him.
Yeah.
And then he went on. He described AI as the most vivid illustration of contempt the ruling class has had for workers he's maybe ever seen.
Yes,
Facts.
Like, not that it's necessarily the worst thing we've seen compared to like violence and stuff, but it is like just this level of like, how fucking stupid do you think we are, right? We've got this. The Democratic Party strategy of trying to find common ground with old people who click on phishing links full time is working out great. Keep it up, proud warriors for democracy.
Hell yeah.
And then in response to a like pro AI guy, he said, I'm at my most severe tanky when I read about these guys. Nothing short of intense re-education can possibly help. And then he said in response to that, I don't necessarily consider tanky an actually useful political designation, but my own thinking is that the brought of berserker capitalism requires strenuous levels of top-down control to fix.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he posted on Blue Sky just yesterday, and I'll close it out with this. We don't have a left-wing party. We don't have a center-left party, and we don't have a centrist party. We have two parties that don't give a shit about tens of thousands dead in Gaza, mass starvation, and devastation. Dire state of affairs. So like, and I will say, like, you know, you don't know for sure from his like music, from all his work. You can piece together a picture, but I did
political. No.
Yeah. He doesn't spend a lot of time on that, but he has been consistently openly political in that. And I think when you like read this book too, like there is like a sympathy for like workers. There is an appreciation of that, like that of, and from his music, like appreciation for like commonness that I think is, that doesn't have to be left politically, but I appreciate that it is. We'll say that. So that's a longer than normal bio, but it's on a guy that I'm very interested in. So I had to drop that. But yeah, cool guy all around. And he wrote a very cool book. Do any of y'all have any thoughts on him as a guy before we hop into the plot here?
Nothing specific. I think it'll come out more as we talk about the book.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely like kind of a melancholy, interesting guy. He's, you know, does a lot of deep thinking, does a lot of long walks. Apparently plays Magic the Gathering, as Lenore has informed me.
Yes, a couple years back, he designed a secret lair, a limited run of limited edition Magic cards. To no one's surprise, it's a series of 10 mountain cards.
Yep.
He also, I should mention, fellow podcaster, at least not anymore, but he was. He had a show called I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats, about just diving into his different songs, which that's a very funny name for your own podcast. He has a really good episode that I really like. I forget which song it's about, but I remember it has John Green on it, which another person we haven't covered on this show.
Abundance of Catherine's John Green?
Oh, man.
That's one of the same. John Green is apparently obsessed with the mountain goats. And it was like a really, really funny conversation between
that's actually how I initially found the mountain goats, which is kind of humiliating. it was I don't know, because I feel like the cool way to find mountain goats is like, you know, I don't know, you got handed a tape in the 90s or whatever, and you're like, whoa, what is this? And then it's like, I don't know, people find them through TikTok now or Moral Oral, and then for me it was unfortunately it was a John Green novel.
You know what? Yeah, that like high school sad boy territory, you know, like where John Green hits you just right, you know. What is that that meme of like somebody looking at like a idyllic like hillscape and then like a evil castle on the right, and it's like John Green, John Darnielle.
Yeah. I will say, like, I think I found mountain goats in the best way I could have for someone in my generation. Cause, you know, I wasn't in the 90s, I wasn't like a teenager, but I think I came of it properly, which is being introduced to it as, quote, a cure for depression by my lavender relationship that neither of us knew about, girlfriend in high school. Both of us ended up being homosexuals. I think that is the ideal way to be introduced to the mountain. And then I listened to it. I was like, this makes me sadder, but okay.
I think it's kind of a nice like story with me because it's like I find him through John Green, I listen to the music, and then now I'm reading his novels, and I feel like his novels scratch the itch of what John Green scratched for me when I was 14. It's like, this is that kind of sad boy lit for grown-ups.
Yeah.
We keep like almost covering John Green, and it's like, if I talk about him, like, I think he's a nice guy and he might see it because he's really online.
Yeah.
And I feel like my things to say are going to, not be the kind of things that I would want John Green to hear me say about him, because again, he seems like a lovely man, but come on, the Anne Frank house. Anyway.
Wait, I missed this. Like, keep in mind, like the last John Green book that I read was like Will Grayson, and that was forever fucking ago.
That's it, Lenore. We're locked into reading Fault in Our Stars.
Oh,
okay,
man.
we got to get into this book.
Oh man,
Lenore just sealed our fate, our collective fate here.
What a wild book.
Great. So, who wants to frame this book? Because I just gave the whole fucking background on this guy, so I just talked for a second there.
Yeah.
How do we set this thing up?
So what? It's following a number of characters, but initially following this young small town guy named Jeremy who works at a video store in the late 90s, and people are returning these videos where somehow strange cryptic clips have been edited onto the tapes, have been clipped into it, and so people are asking like, where are these coming from? And it leads to them falling down a rabbit trail of exploring the mystery.
As soon as I started reading this, I was like, this is extremely Lenore coded. The like videotape stuff that seemed very like something you'd enjoy, Lenore.
No, I was going to say that it's set in like the year 2000, like as VHS is winding down, as DVDs are like starting to pick up. There's one mention of DVDs, like, oh, I hear that's the way to go format wise these days, right? It is very of its time in ways that I found quite recognizable. There, I lived down the road from a Versatile Video of all things, and of course we went to the Blockbuster because it was closer. But like until like the mid 2000s or so, there was also that much smaller, more local chain there, and I think it's a real estate office nowadays. But like it does capture that sort of, okay, the tide of this particular era is receding, and there's weird shit. In the surf, in the sand, as sort of it's exposed, as all the water goes elsewhere.
It's crazy that like you had a version of Blockbuster that could top or bottom. Am I right, folks? Okay. Yeah, Jeremy is a guy that like, it's interesting because he doesn't get given a lot of distinction, right? He is very much when I'm imagining him, average height. He's average height, brown hair, trying to grow a goatee and not very good at it. Skinny, but with a little bit of a gut. Like just your average, like 22-year-old that you just like, when like somebody will post someone online and be like, he's so hot and he looks normal. And somebody will be like, there's 10 guys in every gas station that look like this. That's Jeremy. There's 10 guys who look in every gas station like this, and I love him so much.
His kind of vagueness is like he is so many guys in Iowa. It's amazing in that level, because like just his kind of personality or lack thereof, is kind of I don't know, nails that. And then like the little detail that I think is really Iowa specific is that they bring up DMAC a couple times. That's the community college in the area.
Yeah.
So the rural guy that is gonna start DMAC next year and just keeps saying that but never does, you know 1,000 of those guys when you live here.
And it's interesting, they live in this place. It threw me off like twice before I realized, like, I was like, oh yeah, Nevada is the name of the town.
Yeah.
Because they're in Nevada, Iowa. Because I remember at one point it was like she was driving to Nevada, and I was like, oh, we just changed. Look, no, we didn't. Never mind.
Well, and apparently they pronounce it weird too. It's Nevada.
It's Nevada. Yeah.
Do they really? Okay.
Yeah. There's a throwaway line that acknowledges it, but it's kind of,
we have a Cairo, Georgia.
That's true.
Yeah.
And we do, and my grandparents for a long time, the very barn that I was talking about, Santa Fe, Tennessee.
Well, there's another town that gets mentioned in here in passing is Madrid. You know, Madrid, but Madrid.
We did like to call it Santa Fe, Tennessee sometimes, though,
Oh,
just for
that's
fun.
fun. That's fun.
We keep stealing places here in the I'm from Texas, and we have an Odessa, we have a Paris, like any number of like elsewheres.
I mean, yeah, I think maybe Memphis takes the cake for this one, but
That's a deep cut.
That's true.
or maybe Atlanta just stealing the lost city itself. But
Mm.
what I'll say is like I want to read this quote really right here about like the town that he's in, and this is after Jeremy's kind of hanging out with his dad. They're living this kind of very muted, you know, two guys living together lifestyle, and it says talking about their county, their town. Knowing where you were, this seemed like a big part of the point of living in Nevada, possibly of being alive at all. In the movies, people almost never talked about the towns they spent their lives in. They ran around having adventures and never stopped to get their bearings. It was weird when you thought about it. They only remembered where they were from if they wanted to complain about how awful it was there, or later to remember it as a place of infinite promise, a place whose light had been hidden from them until it became unrecoverable, at which point its gleam would become impossible to resist. And then it immediately goes into Video Hut opened at 10 in the morning, which was ridiculous, right? Which I think that feels like a very good transition there. You kind of have this late night watching the movie with your dad, laying back, thinking a little bit about like, where am I in the world? I'm 22. I work at the Video Hut. What's my town? All the old people, all the family people spend all day talking about who's moved where. Which, you know, it talks about that as a Midwestern thing, very much a Georgia thing too. I think that's like and I feel like anywhere that has it's a very rural thing, I'll say. That's not an Atlanta thing to do, but it's a very rural thing to do. And then going into a Video Hut open 10 in the morning, which is ridiculous because nobody came in. And you have this sense of, you know, this guy who thinks a lot, who's looking out into the distance, who now has like a shift at the Video Hut where he's waiting like 6 hours before anybody comes into the store. You know, as somebody who, you know, knows the Midwest better than either of us, Josiah, how does this parts of the novel hit you?
Oh, it's the early chapters in this are especially the most, I think, like Iowan, you know, they're the ones that like really do a good job with that like regionalism. I made a habit of underlining every like Iowa specific thing I would see that like, you know, you all might miss not being from here. And I think it's created this book. If I lend it to somebody, it'll look crazy because I'm not underlining like important details ever, like things happening. It's like they're eating Casey's pizza, and I'm like underlining that.
What kind of stuff do you have on there?
Yeah, so okay, Casey's is a funny example that it's kind of notable because so Casey's is a gas station that has pretty good pizza. I'd say good in it can compete with chains like a Pizza Hut or something like that. And why it ends up being such an important place is because it's in rural areas. It's usually the only pizza place for miles. So there's kind of like, I don't know, it's like one of those little details that I think speaks to him having definitely lived here before, because like, I don't know, when you get to these small towns, it's like the Casey's and the bar are like the only things are happening at.
So they acquire that kind of stature certainly by their proximity. And that jives with, you know, Jacob, what you said earlier about like Nevada acquiring this this mythical status almost in people's minds, right? Like this place where like my dreams went to die, or like where like they took off, you know. Like there's a lot in this book certainly about these things acquire meaning in retrospect, right?
Yeah.
And I think the book is like pretty agnostic about whether like the small town life is good or bad, right? Like it's not saying like, oh, you know, that's the way you gotta live. Nor is it going like, oh, well, everybody here fucking hates it. Simpletons, whatever. They're all trying to get out. Even though a lot of Darnielle's music is very like, get me out of this goddamn town.
That did surprise me because he like, you know, he works at the Video Hut, you know, the little like mom and pop video rental place, and there's stuff in here certainly about you know, Hollywood Videos opening up. It's a national chain, like it's, you know, drawing our traffic off. But there's not there's nothing really resentful about it. It's just like, yeah, the landscape is shifting. There's a little bit more homogeneity drifting into this once very specific regional experience, but it's something that they roll with in a way that surprised me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well, and the whole structure of the book, it like comes back to this a lot. Is this sort of like Midwestern stoicism almost, where it's not like, I don't know, I don't feel one way or the other, it just is. And then I like that the book explores that as something that can be negative or positive. It feels like it will manifest itself as like people not wanting to get into any, you know, emotional business, not wanting to get into that. Sometimes it's a nice thing because it's like, I've just accepted the state of things. I do this. It's a coping mechanism. It's fine. And then sometimes it's like, oh, you're repressing grief, which this whole novel is about, repressing grief.
For sure. Because Jeremy and his father, Steve, 6 years ago, Steve's wife, Jeremy's mom, died in a solo car accident. It mentions very common on long stretches of road somewhere that's so uniform that ices over so frequently that the roads are, you know, if anybody's ever been to Iowa or anywhere in the region, anywhere that freezes a lot and then gets pretty warm are going to have some jacked up roads. And the more remote, the more they are, it's going to be like that. I will say Iowa, for my money, beats Ohio's roads, but not by a lot.
Depends on where you're at in Iowa too. Like if you're on the main highways, it's not too bad, but some of those county highways can get pretty sketchy.
But they're dealing with that. And there's these two guys that, you know, they have a good relationship in the sense that they're very kind to each other. They both care about each other a lot. You don't see a lot of like, you maybe never see them fight in this book or argue. Not really.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's minor moments of like, I want to ask about that, but I'm not going to. But there is kind of a discomfort with the feeling that exists between the two of them, which they very much launder through like fast food and movies, which is a very like, and like beer, which like they drink the same beer, which is like what they call a beast.
Yeah, because it was Milwaukee's
like,
best. Yeah,
he says beast.
I love that.
Which I love that. Like that's a very dude thing to do. And again, it's a thing that's like, it's not critical of it in the sense of like, look at these like men who can't talk, nor is it like this is the way a man should be. But I love what it says about Steve, where it says his need to maintain his composure surpassed his desire to be healed. Which obviously that's like a very toxic masculinity thing, but it's also like interesting that he is a guy who feels that way, that we don't see behave toxically. We don't see him being like a horrible man that's repressing trauma. He's a decent man who's repressing trauma. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's because the relationship with the you know, between him and his dad is not like it's not negative. It's not, you know, I don't know. They have an understanding. This is how a good person may navigate in this unhealthy form of masculinity. You know, like that's kind of it. And you can see the way that they communicate without saying stuff too. And so that's also not something to write off. Like there's a lot of subtle communication in this book to a point. Like I really was happy to reread it because I think there's a lot of stuff you can miss the first time round because of how much there's just kind of nudging each other in certain ways. But like you had mentioned, they never have a fight. Like there's a great chunk in the end of just the first chapter where they have a back and forth about going to DMAC next semester. And then it goes into, in some versions of this story, there's an argument here because Jeremy feels like his father's being nosy and because he feels ashamed of being 22 years old and not having anything of himself, blah, 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 blah. And the point being like, but this isn't a movie. And that's like a reoccurring thing in this. We don't do that. We don't have these explosive moments. And, you know, for better and worse.
And I find it interesting because Darnielle did have those explosive moments constantly. His life was defined by that, right? So I think that is interesting that he's like consciously choosing this kind of a relationship here too. But a lesser author would then be like, I'm going to make this idyllic relationship that wasn't the one I had. But he's not doing that either. No. Which really just speaks to, I mean, like, it feels weird to call it emotionally mature. He's a grown man, but like the emotional maturity of the writing.
Well, it captures something very, very transitional, right? You know, they have this fairly fresh and like relatively fresh in their memory, because the mom died 6 years ago, of course, in this horrific accident. I would call that fairly fresh in their memory still. They haven't really processed it, but they have found a pattern in which they haven't quite let go of this grief, but day to day they can exist and exert control over their environment and interact in a way that that feels comfortable. All the while, of course, there's something very gothic about the way he describes
Yes.
the dad fixing the drain at night. Right, the hammer pounding dully became the only sound you could hear in the neighborhood, besides the occasional creak of a branch. Right, you have beneath the surface of this stability, you have this physical marker of this awful memory, which expresses itself in this mundane
Yeah.
activity in a way that just becomes part of the environment. Right, it hasn't gone away. It is an open wound, certainly, but not one that not one that has quite the pain associated with it.
Yeah, yeah. So much of the book is these banal kind of things being imbued with a lot of emotional depth. And I think that's where a lot of people who get mad who really don't like this book bounce off of it a lot, is because you have to be willing to go with that. And if you're not, then you'll just be like, well, I don't understand what's emotional about, him hammering away.
Yeah, and
Like,
I think that's maybe a failing of it being labeled a horror novel at
yes, I
all.
think that was
Because I've
probably
seen this book in the horror section next to books that are about like possessions and slashers and things like that. And if you go in expecting like grisly murder and all that, like, yeah, you're going to get some weird shit. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But you aren't going to get that kind of pace, that pacing. And it's not like a slow burn horror either, like, a Hereditary type. It's building up towards these. Like, no, there is actually, every time you think there is going to be this grandiose payoff, it kind of like, lets off a little bit.
yeah.
Um, and that's actually kind of the point. But let me talk a little bit
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
the elements that are horror related, which is what we mentioned earlier. These interesting things on videotapes, specifically the first two tapes they find are Targets and She's All That, just two movies.
So
And in the
2000.
middle of the movies, yes, and in the middle of the movies, these just scenes appear on. I'm going to read the one for She's All That, but on Targets, you just have a scene appear of a person in a hood getting painted on, standing on one foot in an empty chair, by an empty chair in a Midwestern barn. And it like comes in and then it comes out. And it's this black and white footage that the timestamp says 000, like it's no year, no time at all. It is, to
Yeah.
say mysterious is, an understatement. And then you have on She's All That. Let me read it because it's very interesting to me. It was the outbuilding. The door was open. When the camera jumped, Jeremy saw clearly, because he was looking for it, the work table. But that wasn't the focus of the scene, of course. The action in this one was under a tarp in the middle of the room. You couldn't say how many people were under it, maybe two, possibly three, possibly only one, the hooded figure from the chair. That was how Jeremy'd come to think of it, for his own sake. Some idea of continuity made it easier. But in fact, you have to make a lot of assumptions to connect those earlier scenes to this one at any level deeper than their shared location. The figure or figures under the tarp buck and thrash, sometimes with a rolling movement, sometimes in violent jerks. You can hear breathing and a sound that registers instantly as fingernails on canvas. With less than a minute left to go, the action steps up. A work boot at the end of a denim-clad leg enters the frame and prods a few times at the tarp, seeking a point of contact. A grasping hand shoots out from underneath, a flash of color. Then the boot kicks the tarp 3 times, very deliberately. The kick lands with great thudding force. Someone underneath the tarp cries out incoherently, a frightened, choked stream of burbling vowels. Closer to the camera's mic, a man laughs and clears his throat. Meanwhile, under the oilcloth, whoever's there is regrouping. Is it rising to its feet singularly or collectively? Rolling over? Undergoing some sort of change in mass? No one can say. It's too dark to see much. Then She's All That blinks back bright as day. So as you can tell, you don't want your customers to just suddenly like be encountering that while they're trying to watch a rom-com.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's really unsettling. Like, I do think he does a really good job with that. Like with the horror elements when they're there. The thing is, if you come into that's like an early, one of these, and so you're like, oh man, what's it gonna be? and then it doesn't really like fully explain itself. It gives kind of an explanation, but it doesn't quite account for all of the videos, and so I understand why people get really frustrated.
Oh yeah,
with this novel.
because again, like it's and I'm a broken record here, but it has the cadence of horror, right? It has the cadence of building up to something much more, as we said, explosive, right? There's a bit a couple of chapters, well, in the previous chapter when he's watching the segment that's been recorded onto targets, and the description of the scene that takes place therein, it's of the person getting painted on, right? And initially, it's a person of indeterminate gender, but the prose settles on feminine pronouns, which reads like the observer trying to force what they're seeing to make sense. Right? There's some subtleties to there's some subtleties to what Darnielle is describing here that give this a decidedly otherworldly cast. We don't know if it's supernatural or if it's just some like really really weird dude doing this, but it's honestly terrifying, especially in the parts where the prose shifts to first person, right? And then it takes on like a really voyeuristic cast. Because it's like, oh, somebody's watching this play out.
And we have this character, Sarah Jane, who owns the video store, used to work there. Now she owns it. And she's obviously interested in this the same way Jeremy's interested in this. And she ends up going out to the farm that is in the video because she's able to recognize it. She's like, yeah, that's the old Collins place. I'm going to head out there. She goes out there and has this kind of like weird experiences with this. I wrote like, it's not an old woman, but feels like an old woman that's out there. Lisa Sample, she's supposed to be in her 30s, floral print dress, tight bun, but like she has old lady at the decrepit house vibes. And like she knows very quickly, like obviously this woman knows what's going on. Obviously this woman has a relationship to what's happening here, but also like is trying to figure it out. And it's interesting because we follow her for a little bit trying to figure this out. And then we lose that trace of her. And suddenly we're back with Jeremy. And it's just like, yeah, Sarah Jane's just like not coming into work and is just like hanging out at the Collins place all the fucking time.
Mm-hmm.
Which is suddenly like, has she been brainwashed? We don't know really what's happened on our end of things, but we do know Jeremy is imagining all these different horrors that could exist. And the narrative even says like, that's not the way it goes. That's not how the Collins house worked. That's like, fire and terror is something that he would remember as a contingency, as a possibility, but it's not something that emerged. And it mentions this multiple times, like the idea that something else could have happened, but it didn't. And there's different versions of this story, but Jeremy, as immutable as his life path feels, as much it feels like just like he is a normal guy living normally, following the preset path for him. There's actually a wide variety of possibilities that he can live. And in this case, fortunately, we don't get, the most murderous, horrible possibility. But it is more confusing because you're like, okay, so what the fuck is she up to then?
Mm-hmm. That is something that I love that this book does, is that frequently it will say, yeah, there's a version of the story where they have a fight. There's a version of a story where he drives out to the Collins house and like gets engulfed in flames. There's any number of possible timelines where he stumbles into something truly horrific. And what I'm coming around to is the sort of, I think this plays into the gothicness of the atmosphere, right? You're haunted by this terrible thing that took place in the past. It may not be explosive for you, but it was explosive for somebody, right? So what do you do with it now that you're living in the fallout of it? Especially, there's a little bit, and it doesn't really get into U.S. history too deeply, but there's a little bit where they're like, yeah, there were Native Americans here, they were genocided, but we didn't really dwell on this too much in high school. But this is an aspect of American Gothic more broadly that seeps in here that intrigues me, right? There's a specter of people that were slaughtered en masse, right? And in setting this book in like 2000, the early 2000s in particular, I think as well, if you were paying attention to like the coverage of the Iraq War, right, you're looking at this person in this like shed in a hood, and the first thing to come to your mind is Abu Ghraib, right? So to my mind here, like again, it's a Fallout thing, right? You have missed like the worst part of it. You've missed being, let's say, the main character. And so the question is, okay, so how do you navigate something that's already played out that you're powerless to stop?
And something you're scared of facing, I think, because I
Yes.
think like this is the big, like, I this is where I think a lot of the criticisms of it are missing the point of it often, because you see the structure of the novel also follows the way Jeremy and his dad both react when they start to deal with uncomfortable stuff, which is like I like the way how it's always written, where it's like we needed to find safe territory. Now we're approaching talking about mom. We're approaching talking about something that's going to make the mood bad, and so we have to move away. And the novel does that essentially. Like every time it's about to reach the uh-oh, here it goes, it has to look away. It doesn't want to, I don't know, face it directly. The whole novel feels repressed,
Hmm.
kind of intentionally, I think.
Well, and yet, like the there is that movement though. It just happens off screen, right? We get that conversation that he
Yeah.
has certainly with Bob or Bill, Mr. Vetch, the guy who has the construction
Yeah.
company that he goes to work for. Like we get that conversation,
Yeah.
and then somewhere in this time jump, he does get that job and move out. So like there is that day where like it builds up and eventually results in a decision. We just don't that moment just isn't necessarily accessible to us.
Hmm.
I think it's interesting too that doesn't just extend to Jeremy, right? We have a whole section where it's talking about Sarah Jane, where she is doing a task now for Lisa, which is confusing to us at the time. We'll figure it out later. But it says, if she were from Arizona or she was from somewhere coastal, then she might be sweating or agitated or clicking her teeth or something. But the Iowa Sarah Jane, it says, the real one has no beads of sweat forming on her forehead. Her jaw doesn't tremble, and her hands don't shake. And I think that's
Hmm.
another thing it returns to, the Iowa specificness of this. I wanted to ask about this, Josiah. I know that's like a kind of a stereotype of like the Midwestern people don't talk about their feelings, don't engage with them.
Yeah.
What could you speak to that more? Because this is again not a thing that I have a lot of experience with. I'll be honest, there is like definitely a lot of like repressed pain and masculinity, especially in the South, and also
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. But it is like a hotter culture too, in the sense of just like speaking out in these explosions and things like that. So I was curious, your thoughts.
Yeah, it's the South's a lot more confrontational. I think
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like it's a lack of confrontation, is a big thing. And so like that's why there's so much nervousness about talking to Lisa constantly too. Is they're like, I don't want to intrude on some random person's life, as opposed to like the California people at the end, we'll get to. They just like, yeah, let's go to Lisa's. Like
yeah.
whatever.
I hate to intrude on this poor lady who's been leaving like snuff films in my in my Blockbuster.
Mm.
Yeah.
But it,
Yeah,
it,
there's
it really
it
does. You're right. It really does express itself, that reluctance to confront this thing in Jeremy's like conduct. When he has this like regular at his work, Steph Parsons, and like she sort of gets into the mystery too. And every time they meet up to talk these weird tape recordings, Jeremy's like less inclined to call her by her first name, right? It's
Mhm.
this retreat into the cordiality of customer and worker, right? He wants to keep himself at a remove from this weird shit and return to mundanity, which luxury he doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily have.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, so I think this is actually a really good reflection of at least a certain type of Midwesterner, especially rural. 'Cause you get a different, like I'm from more closer to Des Moines, the metro area, so I've got a little more city on me, and so I tend to be a little more, I don't know, confrontational or whatever than this, but this is definitely a really good reflection of it. And even in Des Moines, it still is this really the specific personality type is still definitely there, and I think it's reflected really well. The stereotypes are true to some extent, like
Hmm.
in this regard, and I know that because of being kind of a loud, opinionated person here relative to here, because every time I have like friends that are from the South or from either the coasts, they don't find me to be an abrasive, opinionated asshole at all. But here, I come off that way to everyone because of
Sure.
this. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think there's like it also shows up in these little moments. like the emotion that shows up in the little moments is telling, because you have, like I said, Lisa, this woman that lives out there that it's very obvious from the beginning, knows damn well what's going on. She is clearly masterminding this thing, whatever she's trying to do, which we'll learn. But like, again, everyone's dancing around when Sarah Jane's talking to her, and we get this scene and it's like a little unclear what's happening, but they're clearly like hanging out. And there's like a gourd that like birds can be a bird feeder or birds can live in, but it's been taken over by wasps. And they're sitting there, and then like Sarah Jane's like, oh, so like the wasps like stung a baby bird to death. That like sucks. And she's like, yeah, but, and then Lisa says, it's just nature, she said conclusively. But also, as it seemed to Sarah Jane, sadly, as if somewhere in the question of the birds and the wasps there was something to be regretted, but nowhere that any reasonable person might fix the blame, right? You just have this kind of nature playing out around them. You're out in the fields. You're living a, you know, kind of boring life potentially, at least in these characters' case. You know, you have these, it talks about long winters where you're just kind of trapped in. You have personal tragedy coming in the form of, like, I don't know, a wreck where your mother is the only person in the wreck. There is no person to blame, except like, you know, maybe Henry Ford. But like there, it feels like there is just this, is it God? Is it nature? Is it whatever? It's just kind of like, yeah, I guess the wasps did what wasps do and the birds did what birds do. But then you see this woman, Lisa, that you're like, okay, so is she like a serial killer? Because she seems to like have a lot of humanity. Spoilers, she's not a serial killer. She is weird. But we end up getting into, you know, they end up Stephanie, who I find to be like, I don't really know why she's in the book except to just kind of push Jeremy forward. But like Stephanie and Jeremy rolling up to the farm being like, okay, Sarah Jane, what's going on? What's the deal? This is after Ezra, one of their co-workers, has gotten in a wreck driving back from that farm. Clearly, Sarah Jane gave him some kind of task to move some videos.
He had to go return some videotapes.
Okay. Yep. They're like, what's up? And then there's like some kind of confrontation, and we jump back in time to be like, okay, so what's Lisa's deal? And then to tell us Lisa's deal, they actually tell us about her mother's deal, about Irene. And this is part 2, and this is my favorite part of the book. This is the part of the book that like hits for me. Because this is the story of a family, you know, living back in the 60s. You know, because Lisa was born in the 60s and before, and the 70s and going forward. You have these two, Irene and Peter, who just kind of small town folks doing their best. They meet each other. They kind of have a meet cute at a diner. They end up getting married. Irene is kind of living exactly how she's supposed to, and so is Peter. They're supposed to kind of get married, have kids, do their best at their job. And they kind of do it. They like each other. They don't feel super strongly about anything. It seems like they're just kind of coasting. And you see them live. They're like, oh, well, we're going to move here to be closer to Irene's parents. Well, actually, we should be over there. Well, actually, us making that mistake made Peter lose his seniority. And they don't really blow up on each other. They're just kind of like, this kind of sucks. You know, we're in a dire financial straits. You hit the 70s, you hit inflation, you hit the oil crisis. Well, Peter's got to go a long way to work, and now he's got to pay a whole lot of money for gas. That's stressful. Nobody's blowing up.
God, I wish I could pay $12 to fill up my car.
That is true. That was funny. It was like $12 to fill up the car. I was like, God damn it.
I still,
he probably gets paid a nickel for a day of work.
This is burned into my memory. Like on the day I was born, gas was like 91 cents a gallon on average in this country.
That's wild.
Getting a time machine just to go back in time to buy gas going forward, and it's just going to have a
just get 1993 gas.
And the two of them, they're existing in this like way where they raise Lisa. She's cute, she's gifted, she's intelligent, she's a storyteller from extremely young. She and her mother play a game where they draw lines back and forth until an identifiable picture emerges. Dropping dragons, which was drawing dragons, but Lisa couldn't do the vowel sound very well, so it became dropping dragons. and it's a nice particularity. And then amidst all of this, Irene just, again, having lived this perfectly passive life, not too bad, not too good, always been kind of religious, encounters this sort of apocalyptic church, this church that's
Yeah.
teaching Christ is returning soon, prepare for the day of the Lord, quoting Bible verses that are about, that Jesus says, like, on the day the Lord returns, don't go back into your house for your garment. If you're on your roof, take off, it's, don't wait up. And basically saying, like, the time is short. And you even have this moment where Irene takes a tract from a woman that's also named Lisa, like this little coincidence that kind of leads her there. You have this moment of, if that woman hadn't been Lisa, would you have even talked to her? Those contingencies. And she breaks that rule, that societal rule of just remain until things improve, by leaving her Bible study to go to this church, by like showing agency for the first time in her life, but breaking in an unexpected direction, getting groomed by this like small church, small apocalyptic church, and then like vanishing just to like go to some other city or something, like just abandoning her family in the middle of the night with nothing but like a Christmas card that says Jesus is the reason for the season or something like that.
Yeah.
There is certainly, like, especially if you've worked retail, I imagine a lot of our listeners have, there is certainly that sort of, it's a really effective repurposing of, I think, something mundane that's happened to us. I think we've all had somebody come into our work at some point and hand us like one of those $1 million bills with like, where will you be when this happens? And this is a window into, okay, but what if that was led to somewhere really fucked?
Yeah. It goes somewhere dark. Mm-hmm.
But you can see why she breaks from it. Like, it describes the world. It's talking about the world remaining quiet. And it says, quiet, unremarkable, well-ordered, and well-lit, just exactly enough of everything for the people within its boundaries. A little drab from the outside, maybe, slow or plain, but who outside will ever see it or learn the subtleties of its textures, the specific tensions of its warp and weft? You have to get inside to see anything worth seeing. You have to listen long enough to hear the music. And so from the outside, it's like, why did she break? And it's like, and whereas Peter seems to be relatively happy, and some of the other women seem to be happy or whatever, like, it's not necessarily that everyone's miserable. You would have to just kind of be inside it to get it. And she was fundamentally unhappy and felt this call to something else. And Peter is, completely blown away by that, because he has this thing where he says, or it says, he'd never quit anything in his life. There's no need to make a big fuss just because you disagree with someone. You stay where you are until things improve, and you do what you can to help things along. It goes without saying, and you shouldn't have to be told. Adherents to this creed usually adopt it when young and can barely imagine a world beyond it. And it's fascinating because one imagines a world where it's like, okay, so say Irene had been like more encouraged to break with the mold, to do what she wants to do. This doesn't seem to be a woman that really has many dreams or like an idea of like what her goals are. If she had been allowed to do that, would that have happened? And you think about how that's applying to our characters in the not modern day, but in the late 90s. And it's like, oh, well, they're still following this kind of silent, repetitive creed. And you see how you get to a situation with like horror videotapes that drive everybody crazy, and then but even then don't know how to talk about it and engage with it. And it's like driving you up to the point that something really weird and fucked happens.
Yeah. I think, that's a great point, because you see so much is just being emotionally repressed, and that's tied in with kind of like, John's kind of affection for the banal and for the, everyday. He's not like denouncing that, like it's not just saying, oh, you need to like heroically rise above the everyday, because that's just an aspect of life and you should find beauty in it. But also, these people are emphasizing it enough and not dealing with their aspirations and their grief and their,
Yeah, there does certainly come a breaking point.
Mm-hmm.
Like the bit that he says about, resiliency only means that a thing retains its shape, it doesn't break, it doesn't lose its ability to function. He really does nail that as you say, the you're in the mundane. There is not there's nothing good or bad about it, but eventually, you do start to wonder. Okay, so what's whatever happens, good or bad, it will happen. And that ultimately, like the curiosity ultimately gets to you. And where it takes you, it could be good, could also be very, very disturbing.
Well, and it's also notable that he's using this church. I mean, it's barely a church, but this guy, Michael Christopher, who runs it, who's maybe homeless, definitely seems homeless, leading around this like strange band of people. Like that they are, I mean, the closest thing this story has to really a villain, even though, there's no particular malice assigned to them. I mean, it's also notable since, like, to John, like, the faith is so important to him, right? He's not above that criticism. John just, I think today or a couple days ago on social media made a post basically about, I don't care how normie it is to say, I'm going to say it. Jesus was woke.
Yeah.
Like he's like, I gotta say it. And then made like a little joke about anti-woke Jesus telling the people who came for the loaves and fishes that they should go get a real job. Which,
Supply side Jesus.
It's been done, but I love it every time because it's like, goddamn, if it's not true. But I think it's interesting too that this particular church, there's not really some kind of this isn't going or swinging for some kind of big societal critique. This isn't some mega church here. Not that Darnielle doesn't criticize those he does, but this is a very like particular kind of culty thing. What do y'all make of like this whole thing? Because it's a type of guy I've like encountered and I've seen people kind of fall into. Not to this extent. I've never known anybody who literally vanished, but like I've seen people fall into this kind of extremism from very specific figures. But I wonder what it is, and is this maybe just like dark-sided Rich Mullins here?
Well,
like is this guy? Yeah, is what's his name? I said it already. Is Michael Christopher like evil Rich Mullins?
He kind of is. Well, that's what I think is interesting about it, is because on some level his theology isn't particularly like as like you would expect it to be worse.
Yeah.
And he's got some of the good aspects of Christianity there. Like the whole like seeming homeless and like she initially meets him because he's eating food out of the trash. And then like one of her signs that she's joined the cult is that she's keeping all the food scraps to take them to the church because they're eating off scraps. It's coming from a pretty radical rejection of consumerism and from American capitalism in some way. Like that's there, but it's also clearly something darker going on. So I mean, you bringing up his stepdad earlier on makes me wonder to what extent there's a bit of his stepdad in Michael as well, kind of like the apocalyptically religious version of the intense kind of communist side. I don't know. It's a different way of expressing it.
I like to think of Righteous Gemstones season 3, where like the mega church people meet the actual religious freaks, like the people who really mean the shit about the rapture, and they will kill you over it.
That's a great parallel too, because there's like the degrees to which they're kind of sympathetic on some things, and then they're really nasty.
But it is interesting, and they just take this woman, and we later find like an online message board, which obviously Darnielle has like a special place in his heart for, having run several, and met his wife on one. That's just like for the victims of the Michael Christopher Church, even not in like a murdered way. Like we didn't really find most of these people way. Like they just kind of, we found some of them. Maybe there were moments, and we can mention it later. We're going to talk about the search in a second, but like you literally have it saying later, really wish I could tell you, Irene shows back up in the story. Really wish I could tell you, she places a call or she's an old woman they find, or there's a note, anything. And it's like, there's not closure here. Like, we don't know where this woman is. The narrator doesn't know. The book doesn't know. Darnielle doesn't know, because no one does. Because this woman at some point is just gone. And the fact of the matter is, and it's hard to say, like, that is the case with most missing persons cases. Like, after a
Yeah.
certain amount of like days, it's like they are just gone. Like, even especially in the 90s, right? Like, especially or earlier in this case, like especially in like the 1970s, 80s, 90s. But like even now, like even with phones and shit, like people just vanish. And like, yeah, they're it's hard to say. And we live in a society that doesn't like, house all the homeless people, that like will just kind of let you die on the street, that like we see in Atlanta. They not too long ago bulldozed a man in front of Ebenezer Baptist Church in the head of cleaning up for MLK Day, which is, if you can wrap your mind around that.
Yeah, the clearance rate for all murder cases, I think, is something like 1 in 3, something like apocalyptically low. And of course, like if you're not, if you're not white, if you're not a man, if you're not straight, like even lower, right? If you're any kind of marginalized, you can just disappear.
Which, Lenore, is why we got to deploy the National Guard in every single city.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
well, once they pick up, they'll pick up all the trash, and then presumably they'll find somebody hiding under it.
Yeah, they're gonna. The National Guard versus Michael Christopher. Who will win?
We found all of the missing people in DC, it turns out. This was great. Yeah.
I think to the extent that this story does have a villain, I think Michael Christopher works really well as one. Not of himself necessarily, but it's that horror of... I live right around the corner from like a Kingdom Hall of like Jehovah's Witnesses. I gotten door knocked a couple of times, right? And what goes through my head when that happens is, okay, like where does this lead for you most of the time? How often does this work, and what is this building towards? Like, and you get kind of that incomprehensibility in the role that Michael Christopher plays, right? You don't know.
He's got like 6 followers, doesn't he? So this is his 7th.
Well, and that's the thing, right? It's very much like you don't know how he comes to this. You don't know what drives the people that see something in this, right? There's a little bit where he talks about Darnielle does, where he's like, if you sift through the stories, a narrative begins to emerge that's hard to convey in general terms. And he describes like people milling around in shed number 4, trying not to bump into each other. They always draw back politely. Their movement slows. It's clear that the most they can see through their masks is a faint hint of shadow. And it's like, okay, on the one hand, like their sort of vision is obscure, but on the other hand, they know in a sense what they're doing in this environment and what they're working towards. And that's what this book really nails, is the horror of not understanding, right? This means, this person taking their scraps to this church that eventually devours them, right? This means something to someone else, and it's that train spotting thing of the only way you can understand it is if you're right there with them, right? Which is what Sarah Jane's trying to do when she goes to live with Lisa, is to immerse herself in this. And that's it's the anti-Disney villain origin story, right? You don't necessarily need to know like the ins and outs of what brought this person here. It's enough to know that there is some magnetism that draws people in, and you don't know who, and you don't know why, and you don't know how and when, but sometimes people just get sucked in.
Yeah.
I do in fact know who, how, why, and when, but I will not be telling you on this podcast. If we ever get a Patreon, I'll tell you there at the $10,000 tier that Ryan suggested, called Free the Shelfers from Wage Labor. Anyway, we don't even have a Patreon, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so what we end up getting is Lisa and Peter. I mean, Lisa's a child still, but you get Peter being like, I'm going to find my wife, right? He loves his wife. He's obsessed. He moves, after checking everything possible, he just begins obsessively like looking for her. And he spends years and years and years, an indeterminate amount of time looking for her obsessively up until potentially his death. I mean, he literally has, on the internet, like on a message board, put out like, until I die, you will have a place in my home. Irene, please come home. Never marries again. And Lisa never lives a life of any kind of anything being settled at all. Which is, I'm realizing now, ironic. Isn't their last name Settle? No, it's Sample. Never mind. She's never settled it. She's never settled it at all. She They move around the country. At most, she has like a year.
She's only sampled a drop of the greater mystery that.
God damn it! And
We'll
here's
make this
where
work. God damn it!
Here's where we finally get something where it is. We realize Peter collects obsessively tapes. He collects tapes of, basically like, security camera footage and things like that. And so some of the videos we've seen earlier of like just homeless people milling about eating trash, we're like, why is there, 30 hours of this? Like, what the hell? It now makes sense. He's looking for his wife. So
hired
Lisa,
a private investigator too, as well. So there's a private investigator that's just filming bus stops.
Yep.
And like, yeah.
They do catch up to these people at one point, but they get like 3 of them out, and none of them are Irene.
Yeah. Which is an interesting note that there's like this one moment where some of the families manage to link up and find a couple people, but it's not Irene.
It's almost closure, and then it's not, which is so much of the book to, I think, the frustration of a lot of people.
Almost closure might be a good episode title. I think that this is then shows that Lisa inherits all these tapes. I mean, just tons of them. Just untold hours of footage. And she is a person that, as Lenore said earlier, maintained her shape. She maintained her function. She was able to keep going to school, keep talking, keep moving. But she is a person that never had any stability in her life as long as basically she can remember. She has this mystery at the core of her life that her father was not able to be like, okay, let's put this to rest. His life was chasing after answers. And so she never got answers. He never got answers. And she was never like raised in any kind of environment that like felt stable whatsoever. So it was all just a big question mark. So she did not end up being that kind of person. Best we can tell, we don't know every single thing about why she does what she does, which is basically splicing very strange video, some of which her father took or the private investigator took, some of which she makes herself, just presumably with other people she meets, into these videos. We don't know quite why, but the best I can take from it is she wants other people to experience unresolvable mystery. And she says she does it for her mother's memory and for her own self. It's a little odd, and I don't fully get it. I don't know if any of y'all have more thoughts on like, why the hell is she, why this specifically?
Yeah, I don't know. I agree it is odd. I don't know why I like it, that it doesn't quite fit. I think because of it feeding into the lack of closure to the whole thing is that I don't feel like it fully explains why she's doing this.
Yeah.
And there still is this darker current to it that's never fully stated. Like, so she's, some of the videos she's taking seem to be interviews with people that, she's asking them about their grief and about the stuff they're repressing, like Jeremy, for instance. But then she like hits Jeremy.
Yeah, in the video, because he won't talk about his he's talking about his dead mom, and she's asking specifics about like how long did it take her to die and things like that, and like how did you feel and how often do you think about it, and then she like punches him or smacks him. She's not, we find, like literally kidnapping people, it seems, like at gunpoint or anything like that. No. That doesn't seem to be any implication of that. But she has this like violent response to them. And like there is a video at some point where somebody's getting kicked under a tarp. Whether or not they knew they were going to get kicked under a tarp, we don't know. We just know she was making like weird home movies.
Presumably posting on Craigslist, hey, come out and get under a tarp for a while.
Yeah, there's also like a chance some of the footage also comes from, at the end when they do the raid and get all these people that Michael has been, all these kind of cult members, they get shipped off in a truck with a deprogrammer.
Yeah.
And so I also wonder to what extent some of the footage is from interviews that happened during that.
Yeah.
And whether that wasn't, particularly kind in how it was being done. I'm not sure. And I think the ambiguity gets under my skin, and I think that's why the book stuck with me so long. But But that being said, it is a bit frustrating that it doesn't
Interesting
fully
that
make sense.
Sarah Jane, that this woman that's relatively stable, but in a kind of similar situation to Irene, except unmarried, kind of just dry, like living her life, kind of got where she
Mhm.
was trying to get, and now we're just chilling. Um, Takes up with this woman, feels so sympathetic for her. And like to the point that she's like willing to live with her and basically be her caretaker for a while. Not a physical caretaker,
Mhm.
she doesn't need that, but an emotional caretaker.
Yeah.
And you have Jeremy, who even gets smacked by this woman, being like, "Yeah, no, I get her. I understand why she's like this," and like being extremely sympathetic towards her, even if like the whole thing is really fucking weird and like freaks him out that it happened at
Mhm.
all. Clearly he doesn't push it any further. Why do y'all think that is? Just because they feel some sense of like solidarity with her, not in a political sense, but just in like an
No,
emotional sense.
emotional. Yeah, I think that's part of it, and I think because of I think the attraction to Lisa is the same as the attraction to Michael in some sense,
Okay.
where I think in this deeply repressed area they're in, these are people that are like dealing with emotional stuff in very unhealthy ways, but they're intimate places, and I think that's something addictive about that when you're in a very cold an environment that's really unwilling to go to that emotional depth, and then you meet people that are, Lisa's interviewing you about your trauma, like it's I think people start to latch on to that, and Michael is addressing this, the end times anxiety or whatever.
Yeah, there is, and to go back to the cadence of horror, right? There is a little bit in part one, particularly, where you're thinking to yourself, okay, and they actually specifically reference it in the prose. Like, they could just
Mm-hmm.
return the tape to the distributor and have done with it. And then the distributor would say, well, we just get them like this and send them out. Like, there's nobody really responsible for it. Is a conclusion that they could retreat into and everything would be the same, right? And so you're thinking to yourself, okay, so at what point in a horror story or in a mystery story, if we don't want to describe this as horror, at what point is the point of no return, right? And
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of cases, it's literally driven by curiosity, right? There's no curse, there's no magic that compels you this way. Like, there is just something magnetic about this thing that, in a similar way, perhaps, though certainly not to as destructive an end, in a similar way to Irene latching onto the Michael Christopher cult, you have to see where this thing goes, right? It is weird, and it violates the routine, the mundanity of your life in a way that is going to stick with you unless you unpick it.
And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like, yeah, if you think about it, like, I'm imagining myself in this situation. I find these weird videos. I probably do look into it. I find the
Yeah.
woman, and the woman's like, I am a sad old lady. I promise I won't do this to your store anymore. Would you like to do an interview with me? Yeah, probably, I
I probably
guess. Like, at
would.
this
Yeah.
point, then she
I've gotten this
smacks me
far.
during the interview, and I'm like, what the hell, dude? But like, am I calling the cops on her? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. Um, and then you're like, that's it. Done with this, and you don't think about it until you just get an email later that says, "Yo, what was this interview about?" And you just say, "Yeah, don't worry about it, man."
Don't worry
Uh,
about it. Yeah.
it's all perfectly understandable. Like, the only person that's acting in a way that's like deeply erratic is like Lisa, and we have a pretty decent explanation for why she's a troubled person, even if we don't know her like A to B logic on why she's doing everything here.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're Sarah Jane, it's like, okay, well, I'm living by myself here.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. There's this lady. I kind of get on with her. I'll take care of her. I don't really feel like I got much going on in my life. It kind of
Yeah.
tracks. It's people doing something similar to what Irene did. I'm noticing, kind of breaking with the trend.
Yeah.
Fortunately, not doing it so massively destructively that it ruins anything in
No.
particular. But we get this time jump here that's like jarring. And it's a time jump that's revealed by um, iPhones and the shutting down of what's basically a Radio Shack. So, we're in the 2010s sometime.
Yep.
And we get 4 new characters out of the blue that are, I was like, oh God. And then I was like, wait, these are lovely.
I
Um,
like these characters a lot. But
um,
yeah, it is annoying when they first show up because you're like, oh my God, another set of characters.
yep. I was like checking how far I was into the book. I was like, wait, am I missing something? Because I was reading digitally and I was like, it says like 87%, but okay.
Yeah, it ties back to the Collins farmhouse very quickly, but yeah, it is a little bit jarring.
It's Ed and Emily, which are two older people with adult children in college that retire to Iowa. They buy the Collins farmhouse these years later. It's an abandoned place that they're able to purchase. They want peace and quiet, and they certainly get it there. Um, and their kids, James and Abby, who are just these like, one kid lives in Portland, the other one lives in Arizona, and they just kind of have fun back and forth. They seem like good kids that are snippy with each other. James is like a little arrogant or whatever. Abby is like a little bit like ready to needle people. She's clearly like over emotional. Like she's like ready. Like she sees her mom has like a gray hair and she's like, no, and starts crying. I like them a lot. They feel like a very real family with these parents that are just, like, keep the old black and white TV. The kids will want that. Like, and they're like, why is our computer not good enough? They have like fucking dial-up internet in the attic in the year 2017. So cool. And they're like, the mom is into like old style photography, which is of course this interesting comparison with Irene. Obviously the mom is not doing anything weird with it, but she likes to take videos and pictures, and it's something that she got into in her old age. So, you have this kind of healthy family that discovers a bunch of these tapes that were just kind of left in the burnt out husk of Ezra's old car, because I guess they didn't know what else to do with them. And they start watching them and being like, okay, so who the hell is this Jeremy guy? Why is all this shit happening? We got to look into this, because they get trapped in the exact same trap Jeremy got trapped in. And it's the same pattern of searching for something that is seemingly answerless, that you can find enough strings to pull that you can start looking around Iowa for it, which is the third generation of people doing this now in this novel.
Yeah, I like how they don't need as much pushing to get looking. And that's that I like that little regional aspect, because them not having this like Midwestern, well, you just kind of keep to yourself attitude. They're like, yeah, let's fucking figure this out, They're behaving a lot more like the characters in a movie you would expect,
And Darnielle is from, near where these people are from. So he's bringing that aspect of like, we're hustling into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can also just, especially in these, feel his like love for like tapes and like, when he's talking about the pictures, you feel his love for that more tactile era of recording technology, which perfectly makes sense why he has nostalgia for.
It's also the whole Ed and Emily thing, like, okay, our kids are grown, they're in college, like we have the luxury to go and like traipse around the country. It's a little bit of a there's something wistful about it, right?
Sure.
These are people who have lived a life, essentially, who have made their mark on the world, who have gone through, who've established themselves, gone through this routine, who have, yes, Sheila, Jesus. There's nothing of the interruption about what they're doing, right? In contrast with Lisa and Irene, right? Lisa has her mom disappear very early on in her life. It hangs over her for the rest of her days, and it's that drives her her little obsession, right? Her video hobby. You contrast that with Ed and Emily, like having reached the end of this phase of their life and having the luxury essentially to try something out, right? To try out this new obsession of theirs, this hobby of theirs. Obsession's too strong a word, and it's like, okay, so therefore, but for the grace of Michael Christopher goes these people, right? There is certainly something haunted in that contrast. One person has this future that could have been, that was ripped from her, and these others do not.
And you have this interesting section towards the end where it says, talking about moving physically, but I think this is also emotional movements. It's not that nobody ever gets away. That's not true.
Mhm.
It's that you carry it with you. It doesn't matter that the days roll on like hills too low to give names to. They might be of use later, so you keep them. You replay them to keep their memory alive. It feels worthwhile because it is.
It's one of my favorite lines from the novel. Like that's one of the ones that stuck with me, and I especially because of the regionalism combined with that little hills with hills too low to be given names kind of phrase. I think a lot because it is the Iowan landscape. It's
Yeah.
not as flat as you would think. But it is just hills. It's just a little bit. There's nothing you can give name, but that reflects that kind of banality of life in this, and the kind of imbuing of meaning to these like banal things throughout daily life.
And that compares so well against its multiple times mentioning that something that looks simple from the outside has so much texture specifically. It has
Yeah,
that where it's
yeah,
like, I looked at the field and I didn't realize how big it was. I didn't realize how tall the grass was. I didn't realize how uneven and hard to walk. It talks about the texture of a life that you can't feel unless you're in it and listen to the music. And it rhymes with the landscape in that way. Like, yeah, of
hmm
course it looks flat from a plane. And it
yeah,
is relatively flat next to some places, but it's not. It has texture, it has life, it has variation. It has
hmm
cornfields that would exist if there weren't people and life would continue to propagate itself, right? Um,
yeah,
and I find that very interesting. Um, and these feelings propagate themselves. Um, we end up getting they through investigating, they end up finding Steve, Jeremy's dad. He's an older man now, still unmarried, but he seems to be doing just fine. Still goes to dinner with this woman that he was like dating like 15 years ago, and I guess they just go to dinner every month now, and that's like what
that's
they're
it.
fine with.
Yeah.
And the guy still says, "Oh, let me get you a beast," and they drink a beer, and he yaps about his son to some stranger for an hour, which is really lovely. You see,
Mhm.
I always imagine them meeting up at Applebee's.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh
you
man. Yeah, yeah.
you see
Applebee's.
Ezra. You see Ezra. This guy that got in this car crash. He's still got the scar, but he's working at this other place, this other store where they're selling beer. He seems to be doing just fine. And they end up finding Jeremy online. He's moved to a bigger city, and he works with the same company that he got the new job with, all these years ago. And they have one communication with them where they ask him about this, and he replies almost instantly. And he says, "Okay, there's this woman. Here's where she lives. I encourage you not to bother her." But in my mind, the reason he gives the address is not because he wants them to go there, but because he's like, "You're going to keep fucking looking. I know how
Yeah.
this goes. So here's the address. Now you have the capacity to make your choice not to look." And the family drives there. They see there's an old woman there. And then they're like, let's let this mystery die. And they allow this cycle to die. They don't engage. They go
hmm
away. The woman waves, and we're gonna just kind of hope that this thing is able to fade away with Lisa. That this mystery, this cycle of mystery, doesn't go in the direction that Jeremy years ago feared it would, where it would end in fire and death and blood. That
hmm
the farmhouse on fire and the fields having a murder in it that it kind of referenced earlier. It doesn't go some dangerous direction where Michael Christopher shows back up and there's a confrontation. That the
hmm
horror ending is averted because these people choose not to repeat the generational cycle. And there is actually something very biblical about that as well. Very like
Yeah,
sins of the
yeah.
father about that as well. So, you see kind of the Darnell of it all
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
in. And I think it's really lovely.
Yeah. Oh man. I really like this book.
Sick. Um, I want to read the very end here, and then I have a question for y'all to close this discussion out.
Sure.
It ends with Emily, this older woman who now owns the house. She's working in the big basement, just working with her photographs. It was a nice day to spend taking pictures of old buildings. They wouldn't be there forever, the old buildings. Iowa seemed less bloodthirsty about its past than California, but she'd seen all the construction along the highway on the way in from Collins. Many malls and motels, spaces for chain restaurants and cell phone stores. It's in the nature of the landscape to change, and it's in the nature of people to help the process along. There's no getting around it. It's the same everywhere in the end. Still, when she considered her best shot from that morning, the old Tama Bank and Trust building, gray and imposing above the downtown square, she wondered what she'd already missed. What had gone missing from Iowa before she ever got there. There was no way of knowing. That's what pictures are for, after all. To stand in place of the things that weren't left behind, to bear witness to people and places and things that might otherwise go unnoticed. It was so nice to have this hobby in retirement. There was so much to think about if you just gave yourself the time, even in places most people couldn't find on a map.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the end. And that's Darnielle saying, like, here's a little Midwestern Gothic for you to close this thing.
Yeah.
Bang! And it's lovely. I think it's great. I think it's a great conclusion to this story, even if, you don't get an end where it goes, and then Michael Christopher was hiding in the basement. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine if that was the end?
That would have been so fun.
Alternate version that like the people on Reddit wanted when I was reading reviews of this. Like
the Reddit.
It just does the
like,
Kung Fu Hustle thing where like he gives somebody else a tract and it starts all over again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the ending of Knowing where they have like Adam and Eve again, but it's like but it's like yeah, two people meeting at a diner and they're like, I don't have money to pay for it, and then it's like, what's your name? I'm Irene. Yeah, no, thank God.
I read the last chapter of this book and Mozart's Lacrimosa started playing. It was weird.
Yeah. Fortunately, like it does do that, but it makes allusion, right, to there is this past. We have managed to capture it in photographs, in videos, in memory, and that is meaningful and what it's for. And ultimately, when we say we are no longer chasing the mystery of Irene, and that includes us, the readers, who are not supposed to try to figure out the mystery of Irene, we are not forgetting that she existed. We are not disrespecting her. We are not saying this was not meaningful. We are saying this is a time that has passed, and there is, a time for everything, as Ecclesiastes says.
Sure.
And I think that there's something very interesting about that. But I got to ask, in reference to all of this, what is the Universal Harvester? And why is the book called that? Thoughts?
Well, obviously, it's the friends we made along the way, Jacob.
That's right.
Okay, what friends? Because I don't really want to be friends with Lisa, all things considered. Sorry. If getting painted on under a tarp is your thing, then, go for it. I don't know what the kids are into these days, but...
You don't even want a sample of that lifestyle?
Come on.
No, but like there's a bit in the there's a bit in chapter 7 early on where there's a slip in the prose, right? Where it's right here. The house, said Sarah Jane, reaching back into her purse and retrieving the printout of the frame from when my hand slipped and the front porch came into view. Right?
Oh, it's such a good moment.
That's it's so chilling because it's like, okay, so it's being narrated by whoever's doing this, which, of course, turns out it was Lisa, and it lends a really voyeuristic cast, right, to this next bit, right, where the narrator's talking about what a farmhouse is in a temporal sense, It reminds me very much of Patrick Bateman talking Genesis or Whitney Houston after he's just murdered somebody, right? The narrative's firmly in his grasp. We're a captive audience to this thing he's constructed for us to witness.
Patrick Bateman does like to say, I got to go get some videotapes. So it all connects. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like the mistake where his hand slips is nonetheless part of the footage that he has shot, right? And I think that stands in contrast to how these things are revealed to us, right? Whether we have a childhood trauma that forces us to relive this memory and to share it with people in order to give them some semblance of how we feel, to sort of, collectively unpick it somehow. Or if we come to these things like Emily does at the end, and we can look at them as curiosities, if we can speculate and have it be, something fun, a hobby, something even educational, without that collective trauma hanging over it, right? And the common denominator there is how these things are revealed to us, right? How, either a cornfield is harvested and whatever's left is left, whatever voices that are lost in the cornfield get revealed that way, or whether it all falls and like the stalks are rotting in October, right? One way or another, time or the shifting contours of a society that's becoming that's entering into a later stage of capitalism. One way or another, the landscape will change and leave behind these shreds of a past that we never had access to, except in retrospect, right? And the question is, okay, like what do we do with that? What can we and cannot we do? And how does our proximity to it govern that, right? And so that, and that's what I think, right? The process of that revelation is what Darnielle is trying to convey here.
Yeah, I think if you wanted like a really basic answer of what the universal harvester is it's death. I mean, that's the underlying thing throughout this. It's very much nicely the Grim Reaper, right? It's that same imagery, just in a modern context. It's the one thing that will harvest us all at one point. Yeah, I don't know. I think I do kind of have a mild political reading of this book, despite it being very much not a political book. And I think it has to do with its exploration of that like Midwestern stoicism I keep kind of referencing, that fear of exploring the mystery. And I think it's a regional disposition that comes from being in a part of the country that is like, the billionaires don't live in Des Moines, right? It's a place in which stuff is getting extracted from. I think something I've talked about on Fruitless a number of times is that Iowa and these agricultural kind of states have a lot more parallels to like Appalachia than you might think.
Yeah.
Because instead of coal, what we have is topsoil. And that is a non-renewable resource that will eventually go away. Iowa will be a desert if they do not change the way that this large corporate agriculture functions.
It'll become bottom soil.
But there's no easy way to
Sorry.
point. No, you're good.
Versatile soil.
There's no easy person in your vicinity as a small town resident that you can point to and go, that's the guy that's doing this. Yeah. It was something you'd both had kind of talked about earlier, was the that scene with the nature with the wasps and the birds, the bird, right, where it's like, well, there's no real guy, someone evil I can point to here. It's just nature, right? That's the experience of living in the Midwest, is this ongoing sense of shifting, changing things that are at the whims of the global market. Corn and soybeans are what we grow in Iowa because that's what exports well. Is you make ethanol out of corn, and soy can, is generally, used in a lot of stuff. And so
Mark Fisher would have loved the Midwest.
No, I was going to say, it's remarkable that we were supposed to have an episode in between this one and the Fisher episode, and it fell through. That literally we talked about capitalist realism last week, right?
It's very fitting, actually. That was a big part of why I really like Phil Chrisman's essays on the Midwest for this reason, is he draws some kind of parallels to Fisher as the Midwest of a place of like no future, as a place of lost futures, because it represented the frontier at one point and then no longer does.
Well, you send them to me. I'd love to link those in the bio.
Yeah. Midwest Futures is the essay collection.
Fantastic. Yeah, if you'd send me a link to that when we get off, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the political reading there is that this impulse to explore the mystery, it is such a dead end when you can't easily identify who the bad guy is that's extracting from us. And so you just don't explore the mystery. It's not worth it. It'll make you miserable.
Yeah.
Just enjoy your time, see what money you can make, and hopefully you can retire. Mm-hmm. And this book is about that temptation of falling down the rabbit trail.
Yep.
And, for better and for worse,
Definitely. Well, one rabbit trail people should fall down.
That's right.
Is Fruitless. You see, there we go. that people really do need to go check out Fruitless. Genuinely, what a fun show. And I don't think I have to sell it. You already listened to Josiah, what he talks about on here. You're going to get even more of that on there. You're going to get to discussion. I know people on the show, because they hate us, want us to do more Christian content, like evangelical content. You've got evangelical content on there. It's not all of it, but you've got some great stuff on Christian music. You have a great episode I was just listening to on Hero, the Christian rock opera with Brian Alford as
Which
a
is
guest.
very good.
You've got,
Good rock opera.
Yep, yours truly has been on there. Like I said, talk about Snowpiercer, and it's something that's actually good that we both like. We get to talk about that, and it's fun. You get to hear me talk about a movie, something that I don't do on here. I'm sure I know we've talked about maybe some potential other ideas for me coming on that may happen again.
Absolutely.
And I know that there's just so much to pull from. I mean, you're talking about Iowa, you're talking about politics, you're talking about all kinds of different things. Is a real blast, I gotta say. And also, you have some great video essays too, I will say.
Thank you.
You've written up your discussion of like the discourse around NPCs is really good. Your essay on zombies, phenomenal. Really, really underrated. So people really should go check that out. Highly recommend.
I gotta check that out.
Absolutely. So do any of you have some final thoughts before I wrap this thing up?
I didn't mention all the Cyclone stuff that comes up in this. Go Cyclones, I guess. There you go.
Cyclones.
Go Iowa State, yeah.
Well, Lenore, do you have anything to I said for me to close it out, but Lenore usually has something funny at the end. Lenore, you have anything to close us on?
I mean, if I were renting a movie and there was some kind of snuff film at the end, like, I don't know, my favorite movie is The Ring. I would pursue that to its uttermost.
Holy shit! I just realized Lisa is the like much calmer version of like the guy from Fight Club, Tyler Durden, and like what he does at the movies, splicing in porn at the movie theater.
Oh my God!
You're right.
Which way? Late 90s people falling in despair.
Sarah Jane talking to Lisa, and Lisa's like, "You met me at a very strange time in my life."
See you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.